YouTube, Found Community, Beach Boys fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens, and we're here today to talk about the history of the Beach Boys' Love You album, released in 1977, April 11th, 1977, their 21st album. 21 albums within the span of like 15 years. Most bands can't even do that ever. And they've produced more since then, but originally planned as a solo project by Brian. It was going to be called Brian Loves You or Brian's in Love. There was two different titles kind of floating around at that time. Brian was in control of the whole project. He was writing everything and playing everything with a little bit of help from the other guys. Carl and Al, I think, did some Carl parts. I think Al did some bass parts and Carl did some guitar parts here and there. But for the most part, Brian did everything. And he was really into discovering new sounds. And this was the first time Brian was like super interested in doing a project kind of since Sunflower, but really full on by himself since Smile, almost 10 years earlier. So that's why this album is so important in the Beach Boys' history, is that this is Brian. The guy you loved for Pet Sounds and Smile and Today and all the other stuff, that's the same guy who's doing all this work right here. 15 Big Ones was definitely more of a, let's get Brian back on stage, let's get him in the studio. Please, Brian, write some songs. Please, Brian, write some songs. And the other guys in the band were like, whoa, hey, whoa, slow down here. We've been doing this other thing for like 7 years now. We know how to write songs too. And so there was definitely some stepping on toes in that moment, which is fascinating because this album comes out and it's all Brian. So who knows what was going on behind the scenes there. But this album is a fascinating document of Brian's life at this time because gone are the, sweet romantic love songs, and instead, they're replaced by songs about daily life, desperation, loneliness, memories, looking back. It's a very lyrically interesting album, and Brian did make a mention of that. I remember reading an article somewhere. Brian wanted to make a more lyrically interesting album. In the book Wouldn't It Be Nice, the original autobiography by Brian that was mostly written by Landy, Brian mentions that most of this album was co-written with Landy and co-produced by Landy. I don't know if that's true at all. I know Beach Boys 85 has moments of that on it, but I don't believe it for a second. I really don't. This is such a Brian-sounding release, whereas the stuff from the late 80s with Landy, some of that sounds a little bit more influenced. This sounds completely Brian. But like I said, to have him completely in control, just like how it was in the early 60s, but as a guy in his early 30s who has lived a lot more life and gone through a hell of a lot more experiences in that time, it's a fascinating document. And as you saw from the last video, this album kind of started its life after 15 Big Ones with the Rolling Stone interview and being on the Mike Douglas show and SNL, two solo moments for him. Just pushing Brian out there, not the rest of the Beach Boys, which definitely upset the rest of the Beach Boys because those were big shows to be on. To be on SNL, that's a game-changing kind of thing for a lot of bands. And Brian was out there by himself, and Lorne Michaels was like, no, I just want Brian. I don't want the other guys. I just want Brian. So make of that what you will. But that push to have Brian out there, I definitely think cemented some sort of, or planted some sort of seeds for him to be like, well, maybe I could just do a solo album and see how it goes, see where it goes from here. And so that's how it started. So in November of 1976, he was doing that. That's also when the SNL thing happened. The magazine came out for Rolling Stone. And in that time, he recorded almost 30 songs, almost enough albums worth of material for 3 albums. A lot of that became bootlegged over time to what was going to be called Adult Child, which is a whole different story unto itself. And a lot of it became reworked into the MIU album. This album sadly got passed on by Reprise. They didn't promote it at all because they knew about the deal with CBS going through, which was going to be their next record label. And I really think Reprise has had enough of them at that point. They knew that trying to push them for sales and trying to get them to do something that was going to sell a lot was almost impossible. Rock and Roll Music was a big hit single for them. And of course, their touring stage show was a humongous smash success all the time. But their new albums at this point were always a bit of a hard sell. And so when they found out about the CBS deal having already gone through while they were still with Reprise, but they knew that deal was going to end in the summer of 77, I really think Reprise was like, screw it, we're not going to put any promotion behind this. So it barely squeaked by at number 53 in the US, number 28 in the UK. And that's not bad. Top 20, top 30 showing there. This album divides fans big time because it's a very unique sound, and that's what I love about it. I love when bands that you're super familiar with do something completely different just to see what that's like, because you know what they sound like, but hearing them do something different is very jarring for some people. And that's particularly what drew me to this album in high school when I heard it for the first time. Hearing that chugging, humongous synthy organ, and then Carl going, ha! At the beginning, I was like, what is this? And you get this big rockin' vocal from him, and these huge, chunky drums with this dense, layered production. I was like, wow, these are the same guys that did Surfin' USA, and whoa, this is awesome. I don't remember where in my life or where in the discography I was when I heard this album. I don't remember how deep I was into their discography at that time. Obviously, I knew Pet Sounds and the 60s stuff, but this may have been one of the first 70s albums I heard, so maybe that's why I like it so much. It's just a bit nostalgic, really, but yeah, it's an album that divides fans because you get this insanely synth-heavy record that was very much ahead of its time, just like Brian always was. So, a couple years later, synth would become the thing, and then new wave would happen, and that was all synth. So, I mean, leave it to Brian to be ahead of the curve again, but yeah, that's basically it. I mean, a lot of songs were done during this time that we've never heard full versions of, or songs that we've only heard bits and pieces of, but there's songs called like 11th Bar Blues, Clangin', which some demos do exist of, Come to My Sunshine by Van Dyke Parks, Brian did a version of that one, Michael Row the Boat Ashore, Running Bear, Shake, Rattle, and Roll, stuff like that. And then, of course, like My Diane and some other tracks that became MIU songs, but this album, I cannot stress how important this album is in their discography, even if you don't like it, because this album was the last breath of Brian giving it his all until his solo album in 1988. So, another 10 years would go by where he'd be like hanging around the guys and doing stuff on their records, but really being fully committed 100,000%, where he's in charge doing everything like the 60s. This is it. Smile, this album, and then his solo album. Obviously, he had a lot of creative control and input on everything else they ever did, of course. But this album, hearing Brian play drums on a lot of these songs, and Denny plays drums on Mona and The Night Was So Young and a couple other ones. But hearing Brian do the drumming is pretty cool. Bruce Johnson sings on a couple of songs. His Good Time is on here, which was from 1970. And then he's on the end of I'll Bet He's Nice, which is fantastic to hear his voice back there again. Because they were all buddies. They all hung out with each other still. Bruce just wasn't a full member of the band at this point. So yeah. There's the back cover. Like I said, I'll wrap this video up here because I know I'm starting to ramble, but I love this record. It's absolutely fantastic. Hearing Brian sing about his daily life, about watching TV, or memories, or wanting to be in a different place, looking for hope, feeling helpless, feeling super stoked about things that he's really into, like solar system. There's a rumor that he took an astrology class, not astrology, astronomy class somewhere at a community college, and he was really into astronomy at that point. But I mean, when you get songs like The Night Was So Young and Johnny Carson, Airplane, I'll Bet He's Nice, it's just a beautiful document of a guy figuring out his own brain and the other guys coming in to help him out. And Carl and Dennis were big proponents to help Brian out during this time for sure. So that's it. Long-winded, rambly overview of the creation of this album. And that's it. I'll see you guys in the next video. My name is Giggens. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves. The Beach Boys love you. Don't forget that.